So value planning is necessary because before you put a color down on paper or canvas, you need to know what value the color should be. Should it be dark red? Should it be a middle value red? Should it be light red? Now, it's all based on this. We know that value is one of the properties of color, and you are all familiar with establishing a wide range of values, especially in graphite, because you've all made probably several of these value spectrum boxes. So now the idea is to apply it to your artwork. Now, just as a little review, as I already mentioned, value is one of the properties of color, and in fact, value is the lightness or darkness of a color. So if we're looking at something like this, well, the color here is gray, or that kind of silvery gray, but it's still a color. And so this is a fantastic piece of art where it's really obvious that the artist has a really great understanding of value and made strategic choices in terms of what values the color should be as they went down on the paper or as they were applied to the artwork. Suggesting light, modeling form, defining edges, creating visual complexity. Those are all things that we talk about in art all the time. And most of those are influenced by value. So in other words, artists use value to make shapes look three-dimensional, or they use value, changes in value, value contrast to differentiate one shape from another. Like the boys' shirt sleeves stand out against the dark tree because they are a lighter value than the tree. Just a reminder that we see different shapes and details because of changes in value. Like we can see the trumpet in that man's hands. We can see that he has, a shirt on and a tie. And we see the keyboard of the piano, and we see the snakes down on the ground. Not necessarily because of the colors, because in fact this representation of this painting is not in color. So we see those shapes differentiated one from another because of changes in value. Here's the actual painting in color, but what I've done here is I'm just showing you a black and white version of it to kind of make that point that it's not really about the color, it's about the value of the color when we want to make one shape appear different than another. So here's another example. You can tell that this is a bunch of shapes that are making up like a farm landscape or a farm vista, farm scene. And the artist has done a remarkable job of changing value from one shape to the next, to the point where no outlines are needed around the shapes. Okay, so here's an example of what you would do in order to use a value plan to get going with an actual studio project. So step one, of course, is to actually plan the composition in a box, which we call the format, which means you're thinking about positive and negative shapes. So in this case, the scarecrow is the positive shape, and then all the space around the scarecrow is the negative shape, and it's filled with those corn husks, of course. So at this point, the artist is thinking mainly about shape, proportion, contour, design, the design of the composition. But then the artist has to think about differentiating shapes. So in other words, when I was working on this, I wanted the corn husks to really stand out from the negative shape. So I decided to make them a lighter value than the space around the scarecrow. I wanted the scarecrow's head to be a lighter value than the space around and the negative shape around it. Same with the pants. And then I was also thinking about how I could model a little bit of form in the pants. And so I was experimenting with changes in value there. And then here's the finished product. So I'm sticking to my tonal or my value plan here by, again, having the corn husks lighter in value than the space around them, and the scarecrow's head and hat are lighter in value than the space around it, and etc., etc. Here's a Sterling Hundley painting that a lot of you have seen before. And so this is just to stress the importance of positive, negative shape and thinking about the value of the positive shape versus the value of the negative shape. So this man's shirt, the blue shirt, is a darker value than the white space up at the top portion of the painting. But then at the bottom portion of the painting, we see that the man's shirt sleeve is actually a lighter value than the tabletop that his elbow is resting on. Okay, so you should always be thinking about how positive, negative shape interact based on their value. And in this case, the negative shape is broken up around the head and shoulders of the woman with changes in value. Because that's really one big chunk of negative shape, right? But the artist has painted it in such a way, designed it in such a way that there's like that dark strip running along the base of the wall. And that helps to break up the monotony of that negative shape and create some nice variety, which leads to visual complexity. And here the artist has done it again, and I'm just showing the black and white version so that again you can see that it's not really about the color, it's more about the value. So that we see that it's like, I guess we can call it the ground that the woman's sitting on is a lighter value than, say, the wall. And we can really see evidence of that in the black and white version. So again, that the space around her, it's one big chunk of negative shape, but it's broken up nicely by two different values. And then in the end, of course, two different colors, the yellow versus the green. This is a great example if you look carefully around the woman's shoulders. This artist understands how to use value contrast to differentiate one shape from another, but then he's playing with the idea of using lines strategically to emphasize the contour of her shoulders. And I think it's really clever that especially the woman's right shoulder, the color and value of her dress is pretty much the same as the color and value of the wall behind her. And so that outline around her shoulder is actually necessary. And that's on purpose. And, once you understand how value works, you can then start to use that other element of art, line, in creative ways, like we see in this painting. I think this is so clever too, where the suit jacket is almost the same value and color as the space around the man. So it's kind of almost ambiguous where his shoulder ends. But if you look carefully, you can see just a little hint of a line there to emphasize the contour of his shoulder. And then I love that line that describes the contour of his shirt collar. Really expressive and adds some nice variety. So because there's a lot of big, bold shapes in this painting, but then to have these little lines thrown in here or there adds such nice contrast and nice variety. There's Gary Kelly, one of my favorite artists. I want to show you what he's done here. Look at this. This is a good example of the first step in designing a composition. Really rough, really loosey-goosey, just kind of getting a general sense of where positive shapes are, what the negative shapes are, how big they are. But I want you to notice that even in this super rough version of this sketch, already Gary Kelly is thinking about value. And he's thinking, okay, I want this negative shape dark and I want this positive shape lighter. Look at this step. Now in this second version, he's starting to refine the imagery a little bit more, but he's still including value in this sketch. He's still thinking about where he wants his darker values, where he wants his lighter values. Look at how he's using the really dark value way on the right side to define the shape of that chef. Here's the next version, refined even more. He's starting to refine contour and correct proportions and add in a little bit of detail, but still he's actually refining also the value more and more and more and more with each step. Here's the final drawn version. I've included that little rectangular chunk down at the bottom because I think what he was doing here is he wasn't sure how he would treat that portion of the composition. So in the top portion we see, or the top version, we see those two like kind of elderly women talking in the community there above the cat. You see that to the right of the woman with the bicycle at the fruit stand. But then in the final version, we can see that he eliminated that portion of the drawing, and he actually used that piece down at the bottom where we see the two women talking to the man with the glass of wine. So it's kind of interesting. But anyway, have a look now at, so by the way, so that's the value plan. Look at how that the value is just so refined. And then sometimes this artist does this. He actually plans his colors with colored pencil. So here's the composition with the full range of value, but in colored pencil. And then there's the final painting, most likely an oil painting. So if you can compare the value plan to the finished version, you can see that, he's stuck pretty close to it, which you don't always have to do. Your value plan is more, it's like a guide or a roadmap. It doesn't mean you can't deviate from it. Of course you can, but at least you know when you're going to use your color, what value a particular color should be so that you can tint or shade it appropriately. Here's another example of a sketch that is now turned into a value plan. And so this is another one of Gary Kelly's artworks that I think eventually became a soft pastel piece. But I just want you to notice that even in this version, it's a really strong roadmap for Gary Kelly because he's got those main dark values and the main light values established. He also has some middle values. Okay, so one more example of how a lot of you are or will approach your studio projects. You start with your design in a box, thinking about positive, negative shape. So I've strategically arranged these three horses in this format to create one overall positive shape, because notice how all the horses are touching, overlapping. And I was thinking about having those small chunks of negative shape all around them. Then I blocked in my main dark tones on the horses. And I was thinking also about where I want my strong light tones. And I got the idea of where those tones should be and the shapes they should be by looking at the reference photos that I used. Then I also planned my value in the negative shape. I wanted to break up the negative shape a little bit, meaning I wanted to break up large chunks of negative shape into smaller, like sub shapes, you could think of them. And then I used that value plan when I was working with my faded markers, creating the final piece of art. Some of you will recognize this from previous semester. Okay, so the point is that I had my roadmap beside me and I knew how to shade my colors darker or preserve my highlights. That was really important for me to have a value plan when I did this artwork, because this is in marker, and as you know, we don't use white marker, we use the whiteness of the paper. So I knew exactly where I was supposed to preserve the light values of my paper because I had my roadmap beside me. I had my value plan beside me. One more quick example, just because I think this might benefit some of you who are actually working on designing a composition currently. So often what we do is we collect reference photos. So I had this idea with this project of like a horse and jockey piece of art. So I collected a bunch of reference photos. I created my composition. Notice how I'm not really using value yet. I'm thinking more just positive, negative shape. So I'm thinking about the design of the composition. But then immediately I start to think about, okay, how should what should the value of the negative shape be? What should the value of the positive shape be? I've shaded in the negative shape here just to show you that, to make it clear that I was thinking positive shape, negative shape. So in other words, I strategically arranged my positive shape within the format to create 7 smaller chunks of negative shape. Now here's my value plan though. I think that pink arrow, what I'm suggesting there is that I strategically arranged my dark tones to create that sense of movement kind of diagonally down the composition. That's it. So again, this is all based on using a wide range of values, and whether you're working in graphite or maybe pen and ink or in color, in order to create visual complexity and in order to differentiate shape, in order to model form, it's essential that you create a wide range of value. And if you have a value plan while you're working, it can really ensure that you experience success with your final artwork.